I think he's saying in some real sense, he says, I was caught up to the third heaven. And he says, I saw things which no man may utter.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in. Today I've got an interesting little video here that I want to show you from Lake Point Church. They've got a podcast, and their senior pastor, Josh Howerton, he says that he thinks he's got a new rapture theory. Now, of course, when we hear something like that, ears perk up, want to know what he's talking about. And so I thought this could open up a discussion for something that I find particularly interesting about Paul's teaching on the rapture. And so let's watch the video, and then I'll talk about my thoughts on the back end, and we'll get into it. So let's take a look.
All right, so no, that's not what I want to talk about. All right, so Paul is in 1 Thessalonians talking about what is now called the rapture. That comes from 1 Thessalonians 4:17, where it says, we who are alive will be, and then it uses the word caught up. Some translations will actually use snatched away to meet the Lord. And then it says, and so we will be with the Lord forever. All right, so then I'm like, I wonder where Paul got this. Here, I got a theory. I've never heard this before, and I have a rule that if you've never heard it before, it's probably wrong. So then I'm with Grok, and I ask, and I double check this. I New Testament search for the Greek word that gets translated rapture. It's the Greek word harpazo. Okay, it means to seize forcibly, snatch away, or catch up. Then I ask Grok, give me every New Testament verse that uses that word. All right. One of the only other usages is in 2 Corinthians 12, when Paul is talking about, quote unquote, I know a man. You know this passage? All right. He goes, I know a man who one time was caught up to the third heaven. Now, if you're new to the Bible, you may hear that and go, I wonder what he's talking about. What Paul's doing is he has too much humility to go, it was me. He's going, it was me. Yeah. And Paul says in 2 Corinthians that he had literally I don't actually think it's describing even a vision. I think he's saying in some real sense, he says, I was caught up to the third heaven. And he says, I saw things which no man may utter. Okay, this is what he says. And essentially, by the way, if you're new to the Bible, the third heaven, so in New Testament
parlance,
yeah, that's a good way to say it. The sky, like the sky that's blue, is the first heaven. Space, they had some concept of wherever the stars are. That's the second heaven. The third heaven was like heaven, like where Jesus is right now, okay? So he goes, hey, I was caught with the third heaven. I saw things which no man may utter. Very interesting. One of the only other usages of the Greek word harpazo that gets translated rapture is in 2 Corinthians 12 when Paul goes, I was harpazoed to the third heaven. Wow. Bro, here's my theory, dude. And this is a little tinfoil hat. Dude, I honestly wonder if God did to Paul when he gave him that vision what will happen to the rest of us at the end of time. And that's the reason it's one of the only other usages of the Greek word harpazo, snatched up. And that's why Paul's like, let me tell you exactly what's going to happen to you someday.
Wow.
Because, and remember, he said, this is something which no man may utter. What happened to me? It's a little like, I wonder. This is an I wonder. It's not a we know for.
Well, what do you guys think? Is this a tinfoil hat theory? Is he way off the mark by saying something like this? Is he highly speculating? I don't think so. I actually think he's making an important point here about Paul's teaching. And I think this particular passage in 2 Corinthians gives us insight into a question that many people have had, that probably the Corinthians had, that probably the people of Thessalonica that they had, was where is Paul getting this teaching from? This idea of being raptured, harpazoed. And this pastor here did make an important point. I mean, he said that this use of harpazo in 2 Corinthians is the only one of the few times used. It's actually only the second time Paul uses harpazo in his teachings particularly. So we have two usages of harpazo, 2 Corinthians 12 and his very first teaching on the rapture in 1 Thessalonians 4:17. those are the only two times he uses harpazo, which means, I believe, is that he's making a connection between these two events. So let's go look at 2 Corinthians 12. Okay, so we're at 2 Corinthians 12. Paul is writing to the church at Corinth, the Corinthians, and he's basically responding to a group of what he calls super apostles, or these individuals who are they're basically challenging Paul's authority as an apostle, and they're causing strife within the church. And Paul is like, I don't want to have to stoop to this level. He doesn't want to get caught up in all of this, like boasting about, oh, I've had a better experience than you have had this or that. But Paul literally had an experience with God. And in this passage here, we see he was harpazoed up to the third heaven, basically the presence of God, right? So he's like, but if I have to boast, I'm going to let you know that about 14 years ago, I was caught up to the third heaven. Now, what's interesting is I looked this up, if we look up the date of when 2 Corinthians was written, it was around 55 AD. Okay, so that puts this vision 14 years prior, which would be around 41 AD, which means that it precedes his teaching in 1 Thessalonians, the first time we hear about this event being caught up, that the church, that those who are alive will be caught up. Let's go look at that real quick. Okay, so 1 Thessalonians 4:17, right here. Then we who are left, will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. Encourage each other with these words. So you're looking at this and you're going, where did Paul learn this? Now, he is a Jew, right? He's a Pharisaic Jew, so he's got the Hebrew scriptures, the entire corpus of it, in his mind when he's writing this. So he's probably building on, even before this revelation, he knew about Enoch, he knew about Elijah being caught up to God. Okay, so this isn't like setting necessarily a new precedent. It's building off revelation that's already existed within his worldview, right? So when he had that event, when he was harpazoed up to the third heaven, he probably knew that he's probably like, wow, this is very similar to what I know about Enoch and Elijah, right? But then he was obviously brought back down to earth to teach this event. But what's interesting is that his revelation in 2 Corinthians preceded this about 10 years. So he waited 10 years to even speak of it. And there's a reason for that, probably because if we go back to 2 Corinthians, he talks about how he saw things that no man should utter. I'm sure there was some fear and trembling in how to respond, how to teach people of this without disobeying God. Okay, so after this teaching, then we go to 1 Corinthians 15. He says, listen, I tell you a mystery. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed in a flash, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, the dead will be raised imperishable, and we will be changed. So where did he get this mystery? That's what we got to ask. Where did he get this mystery? Well, the only other place in Scripture we can find that this might have been revealed was in 2 Corinthians, when he talked about being harpazoed up to the third heaven, which would have occurred 14 years before that, 10 years before 1 Thessalonians, probably 11 or 12 years before this here. So what does this mean for us? It means not only does it tell us where Paul got it from, right? But it kind of gives us a glimpse of what the rapture will be like, right? In 2 Thessalonians, it says we are caught up to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will always be with the Lord. Well, the word he uses in that verse for air, it refers to the lower atmosphere. But if we connect 2 Corinthians, then we realize the destination is the third heaven. We meet the Lord in the air, we return with him to the third heaven, which this would refute the post-trib teaching that we meet the Lord in the air and come back down to earth right away. Interesting stuff. What do you guys think? I don't know. Am I off here? Is Pastor Josh off for thinking that these two connect? I don't think he is. What do you guys think? Anyway, if you enjoyed today's content, please do me a favor, like, subscribe, share, and in the meantime, take care and God bless.